because the country, this is the Pentagon, because we've just seen a moment ago that at least one portion of one side or building at the Pentagon itself has actually collapsed. And as we warned you, the whole business of responsibility, claiming of and naming responsibility would be complicated. And now we've, from the Middle East, a senior official from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine has denied any involvement, any connection to a double plane crash on the World Trade Center. It was, in fact, earlier on an anonymous caller who had called Abu Dhabi Television to say that the DFLP was responsible. So for today, we'll put aside as best we can trying to understand who did it, just knowing somebody who did it. Now, one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was, as we said some while ago, American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. That has now been confirmed by the airline itself, or at least by their spokesperson, Lori Bassani. It was a Boeing 767. It would, under normal circumstances, if it were full, carry about 160 passengers, including 2 pilots, 9 or 10 crew, but we have no idea yet whether or not the plane was heavily loaded or not.
Peter, big concern now from the scene that the Northwest Tower, the one remaining standing, is leaning and buckling in the northwest corner. They're moving back the mobilization areas, and they're cordoning off the area in a much wider zone now, because obviously they are now concerned about the possibility of a second collapse.
I'm still desperately confused, John, about what may have caused the building to collapse.
As you watched the videotape, it appeared to buckle from the middle, from the point of impact and collapse, which, with no background in architecture, I don't know about the structural vulnerability, but as you see, debris starts to fall away. Then it cracks, and then it just goes straight down. And now they say that the other tower is leaning. If you look at some of the pictures, it appears to be on a slight angle to the right. Yeah, they say the fire is also spreading downward now through the tower. And I think there's a real decision to make there. I have not been able to hear whether they're keeping people in there to fight that fire, or they're just leaving it empty to let the fire burn itself out, because they're going to have a real problem with people in there if it's in jeopardy.
That a whole tower has collapsed. We're going to stick with the moment, for the moment, with a report that a portion of one of the World Trade Center towers has collapsed.
I can imagine they're going to pull out at this point.
And if the elevators are just...
And facing that danger, as we have been telling you,
to have occurred, this occurred about 2/3 of the way up. ABC's John McWethy now confirms for us we've had from an eyewitness, or he adds to our eyewitness, saying that a small plane heading north, which is exactly what our eyewitness a little earlier told us, exploded at the base of the Pentagon, at the base of one wing of the Pentagon. They evacuated everyone inside, and there was subsequent concern, which may have led to the FAA decision to ground everything, that there was concern that another plane might be inbound towards the Pentagon. And by grounding everything, of course, by ordering everything to be grounded on all radio channels to all aircraft that are flying in the area, it puts the military, Pierre Thomas confirmed for me, it puts the military in a position to take aggressive action, as the White House did when other aircraft have come close in the past.
Absolutely. What it allows them to do is to get a better sense of incoming. If you're ordering everything down, you're essentially clearing the sky so the Pentagon can see what's coming in. Another question that they have to look at here is whether any of these planes might have been laced with explosives to cause the additional collateral damage once the impact occurred.
Yeah, these in every instance, well, I shouldn't say in every instance, certainly in the instance of the Pentagon, it looks more than a single aircraft just exploding on the ground. But again, we don't know precisely the size of the aircraft. We won't speculate on that. But Lisa Stark, who covers aviation for us, confirms that it was American Flight 11 to Los Angeles. There were 90 passengers and crew on board. And there was a second plane. Help me understand this now. So we believe that the two aircraft have flown into the trade towers. Both belonged to American Airlines, and they had both been hijacked. And there were 90 passengers and crew on the first plane and 60 passengers and crew on the second plane. That is the, if there's any doubt about that, someone please contradict me, but that is the report I am getting from our people who cover the Federal Aviation Administration and air travel in general, that there were two aircraft hijacked for this attack on the twin trade towers, now the single trade tower in New York City. And on the first, there were both flights to the West Coast from Boston. And the first one had 90 people and a crew on board, and the second had 60 passengers and crew on board. I beg your pardon. The second plane was not hijacked from Boston, but from Dulles Airport, we're being told, which of course is outside Washington, and we do not know if that was the... I'm going to make this absolutely clear because this reporting gets muggy. We've now reports of two planes from American Airlines, one from Boston, Flight 11 to Los Angeles, which we believe is one of the aircraft that went into the trade towers. We have a second plane, American Airlines Dulles to Los Angeles, with 60 passengers and crew, and that is certainly bigger than a small commuter aircraft, so it may also have been involved in the near. We'll do our best to hand that down as well. Senior law enforcement officials in Washington now tell us that a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department. That's it's a report now from the Associated Press, about to confirm it with our own people at the State Department, though everybody in Washington has been evacuated from their buildings, that a car bomb has now exploded outside the State Department. And John Miller, I see you writing quite frantically on something else.
It's at the scene now at the World Trade Center, because of the concerns of the structural stability of the remaining tower, a temporary headquarters mobilization point triage center was set up at Stuyvesant High School, which is about 2.5 blocks up and slightly across the street. Now the concern is that if the building falls, if the second building falls, that it will be falling in that direction. So they are now evacuating their own command post and triage center, and they have to find an even further zone to move that to. Something that is striking about this today is that this is indicative of, with a car bomb at the State Department, a plane crash into the Pentagon, two planes designated to crash into each tower of the World Trade Center, bringing one down. It connotes the level of planning and sophistication and extreme logistical ability that probably makes this singularly the largest, most well-coordinated act of terrorism.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there it goes, there it goes, there it goes, there it goes. Oh. When it comes downward. All right. We do need to put it down now. I think we need to put it down now. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And now the unthinkable, the second tower has just crumbled before your very eyes.
There's two buildings, 110 stories, 50 to 70,000 people work in those buildings.
They were the tallest skyscrapers in New York City, and they were really designed to be the beautiful buildings out of proportion to show off the beauty of the city. They had 3,000 workers every...
Excuse me, Tom, is down at the scene. Pat?
Where's Wing? Where's Wing? Where's Wing?
Pat, can you hear us? Obviously, there is pandemonium downtown. Pat is not far from the World Trade Center, as you can hear from the sirens, and you can only imagine the confusion and the terror that is in that area after not one but both Trade Center towers have now collapsed.
More than 100 stories of steel, concrete, electrical. Here it is. That's a videotape replay.
We are back at 10:30 Eastern Time on this Tuesday morning. This horrific, incredible not to be believed Tuesday morning. You are looking at live pictures of the World Trade Center where just a few minutes ago, within the last minute actually, the second Twin Tower collapsed. Just to recap, if you're just joining us, around 8:42 Eastern Time this morning here in New York City, a plane crashed into the right Twin Tower of the World Trade Center about 2/3 of the way up the building, leaving a huge gaping hole of huge fire and tons of billowing smoke. About 25 minutes later, a second jet, believed to be a 727 or a 737,
some reports of a 757 even,
then crashed in the second Twin Tower. The first plane, incidentally, was en route from Boston, Massachusetts to Los Angeles.
Here's the video, I think, of the second plane striking the tower.
That's right. We're not sure the origin of that plane, is my understanding. The first plane that caused that hole on the right-hand side in the other Twin Tower was from Boston to LAX to Los Angeles. It was Flight 11, American Airlines. We have confirmed that that plane was hijacked. What happened following the hijacking is unclear. We should note that about an hour after the first collision at the Pentagon, reportedly another plane crashed into the Pentagon, which is just outside Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. All air traffic has been stopped.
Government buildings have been evacuated, as have other buildings across the country. The Sears Tower in Chicago was evacuated. You can imagine that other buildings in major cities and small cities around the country are probably being evacuated as well.
There's an unconfirmed report of a car bomb at the State Department. We have not been able to pin that down. There is also, Jim Miklaszewski was told that there was an unconfirmed report of another air hijacking. We share this with you not in an attempt to in any way exacerbate what is already a terrible situation, but so much has come true today based on these early reports that we want you to have as much information as we can possibly get. At the Pentagon, all people outside were told to take cover just moments ago, but Jim Miklaszewski said the skies were clear.
There was an unconfirmed report of another hijacking with a plane headed towards Washington. Again, we don't want to sound alarmist, but that is something that Mick heard while he was at the Pentagon. We also want to mention that the president is en route from Longboat Key, Florida, where he was there to visit an elementary school to talk about literacy. Obviously, clearly, his agenda has changed dramatically. He will convene a meeting of the National Security Council as soon as he gets home.
Now, can I ask where this picture is from? Do we know where this is? This is
outside the World Trade Center. The sign indicates the approach to the
Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge. So we're
on West Street, approximately just north of Vesey Street there.
And you can see the dust and debris, and this is I don't know if this is at an early stage or whether this is right now. It's at an early stage because there in the distance you can see at least one of the towers still standing as people wander, many of them dazed. And look at the cell phones in their ears. This is in a cell phone society, and it's certainly true in the Middle East, people on their cell phones all the time, seeking and offering reassurance to their families and their friends that something has happened in Israel, and at least those who have them in the Palestinian territories these days.
Twin towers causing the destruction of both, happening within 20 minutes of each other. The plane crashes. They appeared, one was caught on tape. We had a clear shot of what apparently was a 737 twin-jet airliner aimed directly, not accidentally, directly at one of the World Trade Center towers. This happening 20 minutes or so after another plane had crashed into the other twin tower. And you cannot see it under that smoke, but once that smoke clears, you will not see Lower Manhattan with the twin trade centers of the World Trade Centers. They have been destroyed. They have collapsed under their own weight after the destruction which befell them earlier this morning. Once again, within Washington, also the Pentagon has been attacked. All government offices in Washington have been locked down and evacuated. We have a crew in Washington, of course, as well. They are going to be reporting.
Now being evacuated. You may be able to hear some of the sirens going off in the Pentagon. There's smoke billowing down the hallway. Eyewitnesses describe a U.S. Air 737 plane on what seemed to be headed towards National Airport at approximately 9:40 this morning when it then crashed into the south end of the Pentagon. The eyewitnesses describe a huge ball of fire, the plane apparently hitting by the helipad, which is near Highway 110 and Highway 395, the main arteries into the city. There have been unconfirmed reports of second explosions here at the Pentagon. We have not confirmed that, but
I'm about, I'd say, 15 to 20 blocks away. I'm at the Bowling Green subway station. I know that doesn't mean much to people who aren't from New York, but it's in the downtown area. It's a very popular place where a lot of commuters come in and out.
Now, obviously, listen, the most important thing is that you stay safe, John, and that you get to an area where you feel that you may be most secure. Were you able to feel the collapse of that second tower?
The second tower, no, but the first tower that went down, I was very close, I'd say about 5 blocks away. And CNBC's Ron and Anna and I were trying to hook up with the truck or find any NBC contact down there. And we were very close when that tower came down, and the debris came showering down, and Ron and I both ran for cover. I managed to get inside an alcove of building, and all the scaffolding around collapsed in front of me and broke the window next to me, and I climbed inside that and stayed in there for about 10 minutes. I couldn't get out of there. It was pitch black outside, and I haven't, hold on. I'm all right.
You're okay, John?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Actually, I'm being ushered out of here right now. They're sending me inside the building.
And who is doing that? Are police on the scene?
Hello?
John, are police on the scene? Who is moving you?
It was a New York City police officer, and he's just sort of gone on his way and left me now. So I'm the only one on the street at the moment.
You're the only one on the street. Well, John, obviously get to a safe place, but
We are getting reports, and we are getting lots of reports, and we want to be careful to tell you when we have confirmed them and not. But we have a report that a 747 is down in Pennsylvania, and that remains unconfirmed at this point, and so we will check on that. I want to get back to the former commissioner in a moment, but again, to briefly recap, you have buildings in Washington now evacuated.
Who you see here are pretty much all emergency workers. Many of them that I have seen in the last 2 to 3 minutes, quite frankly, are coming out of here. And remember this, these are professionals. They're coming out of there looking literally stunned, in shock, many of them, struggling for breath, obviously in serious distress. Breathing problems are the biggest problem for those who manage to make it safely out of that area down below us. You can't see much more than a block south of me right now, and the World Trade Center probably stands about 10 blocks south of where I am at this moment. And as you can see now, the dust is beginning to pick up here. It really depends on which way the wind blows as to whether or not we get heavy dust or not. But at this point, I can tell you that in the first few minutes, emergency workers were trying just basically to get out of there, to survive. You could see that written in their faces. The situation was so desperate, they just wanted to get out of there. Now, many of them are beginning to regroup, where their commander...
Just riddled. 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock, I'm sorry. The country's just overrun, as it's inevitable it would be with rumors. I'm curious, John, in terms of the emergency operation that you monitor, are they in a sense of panic? Are they or just in a sense of chaos?
In a sense of chaos. There was a brief sense of panic, which is understandable when the first tower collapsed. By the time the second tower collapsed, they were prepared for it. There were numerous other injuries. The level of coordination is incredible. The FDR Drive, which is a main artery, has been shut down for the purpose of keeping it clear for ambulances to go to hospitals. They've anticipated that the lower Manhattan hospitals in New York City will fill up, so they have started to arrange helicopter flights to go to hospitals further out in the circle.
And that they're upset, they're feeling
back on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence.
The group responsible for that terrorism is possibly a group called the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Osama bin Laden, of course, is a terrorist leader that many suspect has been the mastermind of other terrorist attacks all across the country. And again today, there is already talk that possibly he was the mastermind behind what has tragically been unfolding before our very eyes live this morning.
That organization, which apparently is claiming credit, is an offshoot of the Palestine Liberation Organization, but Yasser Arafat, we're told, has denounced these attacks and has said that the PLO had no responsibility. Let's go back to live coverage now from CNN.
I was not able to distinguish between an explosion and the collapse. We were several hundred yards away, but we clearly saw the building come down. I heard your report of a fourth explosion. I can't confirm that, but we heard some boom and then the building fold in on itself.
We are told, Brian, hang on, we're told that the Secretary of Defense is being evacuated from the Pentagon. The Pentagon, a portion of the Pentagon has collapsed after, and I'm not precisely sure on this, and I want to tell you when I'm not precisely sure, but apparently a plane or helicopter hit part of the Pentagon itself. As you take a look at the pictures there, I must say every time we hear a plane coming up overhead, it gets a little nervous where we are. Whatever is happening and whoever is responsible, we have no way of knowing if it's played out yet or if it's just going on. So every time we hear a plane go by, we wonder what the situation is and where it is headed. That sound, we're told by a person here, they believe that is a fighter jet. Federal office buildings around the country, is that correct? All over the country have been closed, or just in Washington?
Well, we were not allowed into...
All right, these are live pictures and reaction in both Washington, D.C. and New York City as the high alert continues, and quite frankly, a lot of fear and concerns are being raised this morning, as well as here in North Texas. Cindy Morris is on the phone, the VP for marketing there at the Dallas World Trade Center. And I understand, Cindy, that you're encouraging exhibitors and buyers to evacuate the building as a precaution today?
Yes, we are. We have not received any threats. However, with the name recognition with the buildings, we are encouraging both our buyers and exhibitors to evacuate.
So it's not mandatory, but you're saying that it might be a good idea?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me what, and undoubtedly the word has spread there, and anybody who's got a TV set or a radio has grabbed one. Tell me what's going on there at the building.
Well, actually, it's been very calming. We have people coming in, buyers coming into the building, as well as the exhibitors. And although the building here is a completely different use from that building in New York, there is the name recognition, and I think just in the area of safety and precautionary measures.
16 flew very low level, did a wide sweeping turn around the Pentagon and back over Washington. And as one Air Force officer standing near me said, "My God, they're now flying air cover over Washington." A very dramatic moment, a milestone in what Tom has already described as a declaration of war, terrorist war against the U.S.
Let's go back and show you the pictures of Lower Manhattan, where the situation only gets worse, not better. That is the financial district of the world. It's also a residential area and a great commercial area. Both Twin Trade Tower buildings now have collapsed onto the ground. There is an untold loss of life. The ripple effect goes on with all the smoke and dust that is spread out across that very densely populated area. It goes down below ground as well as in the high-rise buildings there. There are many residential structures in that area as well. Some heroic rescue workers were down there trying to get people out of the building when the first building came down, and then the second building did as well. Without any sound, and looking at this, there is a kind of a surreal quality. but that is the epicenter of a great, great national tragedy and a great loss of life. No question about it this morning.
We're talking about people who were hurt, perhaps killed in this blast. Many of them have been brought to area hospitals, including St. Vincent's Hospital. Bob Bazell is there. Bob, what's the latest?
Well, Katie, ambulances continue to stream in. Several New York City streets have been closed. Major avenues have been closed off so that ambulances can continue to come in. In addition, the New York City subway system has now been closed down, and several buildings that were not involved in the World Trade Center area have been shut down, and people have been told to go home, but a lot of them are just wandering aimlessly on the street. Many people openly weeping and hugging each other. This is clearly is a time that, as Tom described, is very close to the beginning of a war, and but the casualties do keep coming in. Burns, smoke inhalation, very severe, and again, all the medical people that I've talked to say this is just the tip of the iceberg. We expect casualties to be coming in all through the night and way into tomorrow and beyond.
Bob, if you could just stand by for a moment, because we have this report from AP that I'm just simply going to read. A large plane crashed Tuesday morning just north of the Somerset County Airport, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. Airport officials said the plane, believed to be a Boeing 767, crashed around 10 a.m. about 8 miles east of Jennerstown. According to County 911 dispatchers, WPXI-TV reported. The crash came the same morning that terrorists crashed 2 planes into the World Trade Center in New York City, and the twin 110-story towers collapsed. Explosions also rocked the Pentagon and the State Department, although that was refuted moments ago, and spread fear across the nation. There was no other immediate details on the Pennsylvania crash, and it was not clear whether the crash was related to the others. Again, that was a report.
What to do. No one's even speaking.
And again, for people, Kitty, thank you, not familiar with New York, Kennedy is the major airport handling international flights into the city. It is also an enormous complex of 7 or 8 or 9 terminals.
That's exactly right. And in fact, the baggage has been unloaded into a separate terminal from where I am, and they're asking people to walk over, pick up.
At the major U.S. exchanges today. They will not open today. Maria Bartiromo, however, has been in the financial district all morning. She's now live at the New York Stock Exchange. Maria, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sue. Well, basically, clearly the city has come to a halt in New York. I am on Wall Street. I have been down here and witnessed 2 of the explosions. Now, the first explosion that I witnessed was the second plane going into the second tower. I was outside. Frankly, I ran for my life. It was like a movie, a plane going right into the top of the World Trade Center, the second tower. The whole Wall Street area, Broadway, Wall Street, Broad Street, was filled with people. Everyone just ran. There was a lot of debris coming at all of us. In fact,
all the way down as far as they can get from Canal to the area of where both buildings once stood. Joining me here is Tito Castellanos. He was inside the building at the time of the explosion. Chris, I'm going to let him explain to you what he saw, what he experienced. Hello.
Hi, what can you tell us about where you were and what you saw and heard?
I was at the subway station, and my ticket stub says 8:45 a.m. And as I was waiting for the train to come, we heard the explosion. A lot of debris fell on us, you know, like dust type of particles and stuff like that. And then automatically they started to tell us to evacuate through another exit. So finally we were able to get out. We come to the sidewalk on the scene there. I saw a lot of debris and smoke on the street and sidewalk, and the cops on the other side of the street were telling us to hold on because there was still a lot of debris falling from the building that was burning, actually. As all this rain of bricks and glass and stuff that was coming down stopped, we were told to go on, but the people behind us were panicking, and they started to push us into the street. Finally, I got to the corner of the street, and I looked up, and that's when the second airplane, I saw it coming on the horizon. It made like a small nosedive, and boom, hit the second building, the one that's facing the south part. Anyway, at that moment, everybody panicked, started to run away. I was under a debris of hot metals. Excuse me. I was in the building because I was driving a friend. Now I'm worried for her safety. She works in the U.S. Customs. I pray for her to be all right. I was injured in my leg, and I had my hip almost dislocated because I had a hip replacement a year ago. I'm sorry, I'm pretty shaky right now.
Chris, this is Rick.
That's
just one of many stories as people come by us here, all of them telling us their stories of the people that they know that are inside the building, people that they fear are trapped inside the building. And I would say that of every 20 people that walks by, one of them has some type of injury, be it a small injury, a bandage, they're wrapped, they're holding their eyes, they're holding their head. So many thousands of people are out in this area today that have been affected by that story. Tito Castellanos, just one of them.
And he mentioned that he was injured in the leg, although obviously that injury not life-threatening.
I'm looking at his injury right now. It seems to be more of some kind of cut. It's not a large laceration, just a cut on his leg, somewhere between his ankle and his knee.
What have you been able to see?
Up the street. There's an incredible amount of panic down here in downtown Manhattan as people are realizing that they really need to leave the area entirely after spending the last hour or so just watching this from afar.
Rose, stay with us. Terrific work. Let me throw another couple of pieces of information out as we continue to put this all together into a straight line if we can. The United Nations has been evacuated. The United Nations building on the east side of Manhattan has been evacuated. The city is in, this is election day, a primary election for mayor and city council races here in New York. That election has been postponed until further notice. Obviously, we are in the middle of an extraordinary catastrophe that started about 8:45 Eastern Time here in New York when one plane crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. About a half an hour after that, as people were converging, as fire and police and rescue teams were converging on the scene, a second plane appeared to the west of the Trade Center buildings and slammed into the second tower. That's what you just saw. Fire shooting out the north and east side of the tower. Shortly after that, we began to get reports of events taking place in Washington. An explosion which first came to us as a fire at the Pentagon. Now there's a report of a second hijacked plane heading towards the Pentagon. It is believed that one of the planes, perhaps both, but one of them we have been told was an American Airlines 767 that hit one of the Trade Center towers. About a half an hour after that, perhaps a little bit longer, lose track of time a little bit in these situations, the first tower, or let me correct that, the south tower, the second tower, the one to the left, collapsed. It collapsed in a cascade of smoke and spark, and what we cannot tell you is if there was a second explosion that caused that collapse or if it was simply, that's the first one, that's the south tower collapsing, and that was about a half hour, give or take, after the planes hit the tower. Then shortly after that, just as the smoke was starting to clear away, the second tower, and that's what you're looking at now. Again, this was not very long ago, 10, 15 minutes ago. The second tower, it almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see, except there is nothing controlled about this. This is devastation. How many people? There are 50,000 people who normally go to work in the Trade Center buildings. How many of those people had arrived already? How many of those people were trapped on the upper stories? How many of those people have been hurt? How many of those people died? We cannot tell you now. We can tell you that hospitals throughout the New York area are receiving literally hundreds of patients, and they are performing triage. They are trying to figure out who could be treated, who needs help first. This is sort of standard operating procedure. We are just being told now that Israel has evacuated all its diplomatic missions around the world. Israel has evacuated its missions. We are told now that Yasser Arafat has condemned these attacks, and we don't know yet who's behind them. Britain has condemned these attacks. Germany has convened its National Security Council, and we will check and see if events are going on in those places or if that is simply a reaction to what has gone on here in Washington and in New York. CNN's Jean Meserve joins us on the phone from Washington. Jean.
K Street, which is one of the major thoroughfares here in Washington, it is absolute gridlock. It takes about 15 minutes to drive one block. Ordinarily, this time of day, there'd be nothing near this kind of traffic. You see pedestrians filling the sidewalks, many of the businesses and offices here having closed.
The producer I'm working with, we had to break down a window just to breathe and just to escape the black cloud of glass and debris and dust. There were a couple of other people, two New York City police officers who were directly behind us, banging on the window to get in as well. We let them in, and because there were double door glass, but even two doors of glass, there was still horrible debris. And the police officer who came in behind us, we didn't even know he was a police officer because he was so covered in this debris and this dust. And I myself, I'm completely gray from head to toe. It's really eerie seeing the people who got caught in that blast because everyone looks like a ghost. And the streets are, it's like Mount St. Helens. The streets are covered in about an inch of this gray dust and ripped papers and shreds of charred glass. And a lot of people are sort of milling about trying to connect, with payphones on the corners, but the payphones aren't working either. At this point, most of the emergency crews who are responding aren't able to really deal with any of the direct pedestrians in the area, which is incredible because this is one of the most dangerous areas right now, considering that those two buildings have collapsed. They were looking at sewers, watching for bombs. It's an incredibly dangerous area to be in, and yet they can't respond to that essence of this crisis because there's just so much more going on at the World Trade Centers. It is truly an unbelievable tragedy down here in Lower Manhattan.
Ashley, we appreciate the report. The most important thing, of course, is that you get to an area where you can feel that you are safe. So, keep in touch with us as you can, but the most important priority is that you stay safe for us.
What most people have said, Chris, is that they don't feel safe anywhere at this point.
And that, sadly, is understandable. You are watching continuing NBC News coverage on MSNBC, a horrific sequence of destruction, terrorism reigning.
I've got just a little rundown here, if I can, Matt, for just a moment about what's going on around the country. The State Department officials have been moved into the State Department.
Witnesses say
Center in downtown Minneapolis, tallest building, evacuated. Georgia, all flights at Hartsfield Atlanta International Airport closed. The
alienated groups, terrorist groups that wanted to punish the United States, certainly they should have. But I don't think anyone anticipated that any of the groups could have done this kind of coordinated, synchronized terrorist events.
Yeah, I want to know more about that, Vincent. I don't mean to have you have to defend the intelligence community, but we hear this all the time. Groups are not sophisticated to do this. Did the intelligence community
possibly concerned about fellow employees or loved ones? It's certainly, though, a very busy
area. The Pentagon continues to monitor reports that another plane, a hijacked plane, is headed for that area. All flights have been canceled around the country. International flights heading towards the United States are being diverted into Canada this morning. Patty, let me go back to you as we look at some tape from the ground. Patty, why don't you go ahead and continue?
Okay, Aaron, I'm in the main building of Pace University, which is inside the fallout zone of all the debris from the two building collapses. At the time of the first building collapse, I was at Broadway and Park Place. There was a huge cloud of smoke. It overcame the crowd. People were stampeding. Literally, the debris was so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. I ducked around into a building that was on Park Place and Beekman Street. When I was in there, people were coming in, they were crying, they were wailing. You couldn't see anything outside. After the smoke had cleared a little bit, I came outside. The scene was like a ghost town in the financial district, very eerie. You saw people being wheeled on gurneys away from the site of the explosion. People were coming out with masks over their face, anything they could put over their face, because the air was still very thick with debris. The ash on the ground is at least 2 inches thick. It's more like snow cover, a very eerie snow cover blanketing downtown Manhattan right now. Now, at the time, I was back on the corner again of Broadway and Park Place. At that time, the police started running toward us, telling everybody to move who was left on the street. I looked up, and that's when I heard the, pardon me, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down. Again, whoever was left on the street started stampeding. I'm in the office. Right now I'm in the main building of Pace University. People are crying. They have gas masks on their face. Authorities are making people go toward the basement. They're just doing anything that they can to move people away from the financial district. But again, it is a very horrifying scene down here, very eerie, like a ghost town.
Patty, let me interrupt you. Mayor Giuliani is on the telephone, is part of New York One's coverage. We join our affiliate for that.
Mayor Giuliani, since we have New Yorkers listening, and obviously their thoughts are with the people who are down there.
Urge them to remain calm, to remain at home, or to remain at their place of business, unless they're in Lower Manhattan. By that I mean south of Canal Street. If you're south of Canal Street, get out, walk, and walk slowly, carefully. There are plenty of police around, but just walk directly. If you can't figure out what else to do, just walk directly north. That'll get you out of the dangerous smoke area. It'll also do us a big favor. It'll open up those streets, because we're going to be moving a large number of ambulances and emergency personnel in and out of there all day. I've talked to the governor. He is putting the National Guard on alert so that they can relieve our police officers and our firefighters later this afternoon. And we've asked the federal government for help from the urban search and rescue team. So right now, we're using all of our police and firefighters and emergency personnel to help the people down there. Later on, we're probably going to need reinforcements.
Mayor Giuliani, I realize that it must be more than a chaotic situation, particularly since the bunker has been compromised and cordoned off. But can you give us any sense? There are so many people watching now who must have loved ones down in that area and are concerned of the systematic...
My heart goes out to them. I've never seen anything like this. I was there from shortly after it happened and saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. It's a horrible, horrible situation. And all that I can tell them is that every resource that we have is attempting to rescue as many people as possible. And the end result is going to be some horrendous number of lives lost. I don't think we know yet. But right now, we have to just focus on saving as many people as possible.
Can you give us a sense of, if there is in fact some system being implemented, what that system is and where people...
Los Angeles is on a state of tactical alert. San Francisco, pretty much the same thing. In Virginia, Navy installations are under an increased security condition called ThreatCon Charlie. In New Jersey, once again, the bridges and tunnels into Manhattan are closed. Again, to recap, let's take a look at what you are seeing there in the live pictures on your screen. The World Trade Center is now essentially gone. The Twin Towers were struck earlier this morning in coordinated attacks. We had a report of a jetliner smashing into the first tower. Here comes a replay video of a second plane that smashed into the second tower about midway, shortly after 9 a.m. this morning, Eastern Time. That tremendous fireball, you can imagine, triggered a fire inside the building that apparently weakened the structural elements to the point that the upper level of the building simply could not stand. It collapsed, and there again, this is a replay of the second plane smashing into the World Trade Center. It happened as we were on the air live shortly after 9 o'clock this morning Eastern Time. Now, both towers went up in flames, and there was clearly a tremendous loss of life, but then came the catastrophic collapse. This, the second collapse of the tower that was actually struck by the first plane. All right, I'm told that that is the first collapse, but no, that was the tower with the tower, the television tower on top was the second one to go down. You can see the glass, the debris raining down, and imagine, folks, that firefighters and police officers were all around the base of that building trying to evacuate people as it came down. I can't think of a more catastrophic collapse. On top of that, we just heard from David Schuster, the Pentagon has been under attack. American Airlines is going to be holding a press conference about 25 minutes from now in Dallas to talk about one of the planes that was apparently involved in this World Trade Center collapse. We believe, well, in fact, American Airlines has told us that their Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was hijacked this morning, and we believe that the hijackers somehow then commandeered the cockpit controls and flew that American Airlines plane into the World Trade Center. That would probably be, we don't have confirmation, but probably be the first one that hit.
I think, John, if I can interrupt just, I think investigators now are probably looking to see how the hijackers in this coordinated attack were able to take over the controls. Did they shoot the pilots and then jump in the seats? What happened? Osama bin Laden, sources have told me, has had pilots on his payroll. We have 3 pilots that were accused of being conspirators in the East African Embassy bombing trial here in New York City. So you certainly have perhaps investigators looking at a base of operation out of Boston and perhaps out of Pittsburgh, since you have a U.S. airplane into the Pentagon, which their main hub is Pittsburgh, and another crash outside of Pittsburgh.
Bill Daley, a former investigator for the FBI, has been good enough to stay with us. Bill, a couple of brief thoughts.
Yeah, John. We have a report here that Osama bin Laden, who is often identified as the world's leading terrorist, warned 3 weeks ago that he and his followers would carry out an unprecedented attack on U.S. interests for his support of Israel. An Arab journalist with Access said to him Tuesday in London.
Abdel Bari Atwan, editor of the London-based Al-Qud Al-Arabi newspaper, said Islamic fundamentalists led by bin Laden was almost certainly behind the attack of the World Trade Center in New York. Quote, it's most likely the work of Islamic fundamentalists. Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago that he would attack American interest in an unprecedented attack, a very big one, Atwan told Reuters.
He has interviewed bin Laden, and he maintains close contact with his followers, according to Reuters. So that's the first report that we've had that Osama bin Laden may have been responsible. Obviously, it was a very sophisticated organization, carefully coordinated. It had to have its origins in this country. Louis Freeh, the FBI director, as he left office, said that his continuing great concern
appointments, lives, meetings, all of the other things that are part of the daily existence are going to have to be, in effect, suspended until we get more information and can mount the proper response.
Now, Secretary Kasperger, we are now getting reports of a horrendous number. It's the only way we can describe the casualties at this point.
Absolutely. It's completely unbelievable, because those buildings are fully occupied and there was no time for anyone really to escape. It's beyond belief.
I don't know if you saw the actual collapse, but both buildings, as we hasten to remind our viewers, and we wish we didn't have to, but as you can see the smoke over Manhattan, you will not see one of the landmarks that has stayed up since it was built in the 60s and 70s. Right. The World Trade Center simply no longer exists. The Twin Towers collapsed in themselves after being struck approximately 2 hours ago. But Caspar Weinberger, we thank you very much, former Secretary of Defense, excuse me, under President Ronald Reagan, commenting on the state of lockdown that is happening not only in New York, not only in the northeast quadrant of the U.S., but all over the United States because of this dastardly terrorist attack that can only be compared to, as Caspar Weinberger just did, the attack on Pearl Harbor back in December of 1941. Of course, the point there was that we had a nation that we could blame for that attack. In this particular case, as of yet, we do not have a particular nation to blame for this awful, awful attack, causing a, quote, horrendous, according to law enforcement officials in New York, loss of life. The only words they can use are adjectives. The specifics undoubtedly will come after hours, perhaps days, once the debris and destruction is cleared from that area of lower Manhattan. This, again, perhaps the most
monstrous attack, expressed his solidarity with the American people. France has just learned of these monstrous attacks. He says there is no other word for it. And Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and his top aides are following the events from his seaside offices in Gaza City. He says, I send my condolences to the president, the government, and the people for this terrible incident.
And we are now getting this bulletin. Canada has shut down all of its airports, according to the transport minister. And that following the shutdown of all flights in America and international flights coming to America being diverted to Canada. There you see the map of the United States. Normally, it would be absolutely covered with blue dots representing the planes in the air. Now it is nearly empty. We're going to go to the New York area. There you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 planes, it looks as though, that have yet to land. All planes are being halted. Airports across America, a great many of them are being closed. It has been a scene of nightmare. People on fire, jumping in terror from the trade towers, the World Trade Center, just before the buildings collapsed. You're watching NBC News coverage on MSNBC.
And the impact continuing to be felt from coast to coast as America continues to be under threat of terrorist attacks. All federal buildings, we are now learning, in West Virginia, in Maryland, in Pennsylvania, and in Delaware are closed in response to what is happening around the country. Again, in Dallas, offices evacuated. In Florida, Jeb Bush has closed the Capitol and canceled meetings with his cabinet. And from Mayor Rudy Giuliani in New York City, the site of the first 2 terrorist attacks, he says, I have a sense it's a horrendous number of lives lost. Right now, we have to focus on saving as many lives as possible.
And there you see the live scene very close to the collapse of the World Trade Center. NBC's Pat Dawson has been reporting there all morning long. Here's a quote from a fire marshal who was there when the Twin Towers collapsed. Everybody was screaming, crying, running. Cops, people, firefighters, everyone. It was like a war zone. There are many injured and many dead. Let's go to Ashley Banfield, who joins us live on the telephone. Who is there? Ashley, tell us what you've seen and heard.
There's just been another explosion, and as happened with the last 2, it may be a car bomb. That's what we were hearing from passing police officers. The last 2 were thought to be car bombs. This third one, I haven't had any confirmation on it yet, but there is, I mean, the plumes of smoke have been so thick anyway. There are more plumes coming from that area. It's pitch black down the street through 7th Avenue and into where the World Trade Center once stood. People are collecting all over here. Police are trying to disperse people, but it's not working. There's just hundreds of people milling about, wondering what is going on. I can see another plume sort of headed my way. Sorry, excuse me. It's pretty hard to get any information right now, as you can imagine, because obviously a lot of these emergency crews are in jeopardy as well. They're the ones who've gone closest to where this has all happened.
Ashley, stand by. Let me jump in and go to NBC's Pat Dawson at the World Trade Center.
Come back here, come back here.
Insight into what's going on there. This is Chief William Hall of the Port Authority Police of New York. As we told you earlier, the Port Authority Police have jurisdiction over the Trade Center. And also Alan Rice, who's the director of the World Trade Center. Gentlemen, if I get you just to stand like that. First of all, Chief, do we have any idea of how many people are in there?
We have no idea. Now, as you know, it was pretty much rush hour time that this took place this morning, so the numbers we don't know yet. We tried to get almost everybody out that we could early on.
After the first 2 crashes, when the planes hit the building, there was roughly about, I would say, what, an hour and 15 minutes between that and the point where the South Tower collapsed. How many people you were able to get out? Do you have any idea?
We don't know. We tried to do a floor-by-floor search. New York City Police, the Fire Department, Port Authority Police, best they could, tried to get everybody out. But as you know, there were people still coming out after that building came down.
Do you have any idea how many people would normally be in the building at 8:30 or north? This is the director of the World Trade Center.
There are probably 10,000 people in each tower. 10,000 people in each tower would typically be in there on a normal business day. And we get about another 5,000 visitors during the course of the entire day. So by 8:30, 9 o'clock, the building should have been full.
So in other words, by 8:30 to 9, you figure the building would have been approaching full capacity with the workers. So we are.
But they have been ordered. This is the first time in U.S. history that they have ordered a ground alert, told all the planes that they need to reach their destinations. In addition to this, all international flights are being ordered to Canada, but we are told just a few months ago an FAA...
Obviously, heavy casualties at the Pentagon. There have been ambulances and helicopters coming and going for the last hour. The area has been cordoned off. The skies above the Pentagon, there have been F-16s circling. The entire area has been evacuated. More than 20,000 people work in the Pentagon, Peter, and this is a disaster.
John, at ground level, for example, in the side of the building where the plane penetrated from the outer ring to the inner ring, do you know precisely what goes on in that section of the building?
I do not, Peter. That is not where the highest-ranking people are. The Secretary of Defense and most of the chiefs of the services are on a different side of the building, but in a way it almost doesn't matter. There are going to be many high-ranking people from the Defense Department who are going to be either injured or killed in this attack.
And John, is this something which the Pentagon is trying to take care of wholly itself? I mean, are we talking to you about a circumscribed military operation to emerge from this chaos?
It's very difficult, Peter. The FBI is here, local police are here.
Mental health team. Anita, thank you. I want to take you back to Love Field this morning, a live picture. Southwest Airlines, of course, based at Love Field, and tells us this morning that none of its planes whatsoever
doesn't occur. How is the Pentagon defended in any way?
The right, and you can see it coming behind the first tower, and then it hits the tower, and you'll see the flame and smoke coming out, I guess 3/4, maybe a little more, up the tower. That's where this all began. About a half an hour after that, the first of that tower that is now you see in flame there in your shot collapsed. The top collapsed. And there was an enormous, I don't want to say explosion, but there was an enormous plume of smoke, sparks, as we looked over from where we're standing. And then a little bit after that, and I want to be careful on time because it seemed perhaps 10 or so minutes, but I'm not sure. The second tower, which in fact was the first one hit, collapsed as well, and that's what you're about to see. Our reporters in the area say they heard loud noises when that happened. It is unclear to them and to us whether those were explosions going on in the building or if that was simply the sound of the collapse of the buildings as they collapsed, making these huge noises as they came down. But as we look back, the smoke now, which has gone from white to a kind of gray, clearing away, we are, I guess, Jeff, I want to know what's behind the smoke, but I have the worst feeling is that very little.
And the fact is that we've already been hearing from even the fragmentary reports from people on the ground, stories beyond horror, people jumping out of windows because of the flames. The fact that this happened shortly before 9 and then the second hit shortly after 9 means that most of the people were either right in the vicinity or actually at their desks. So one doesn't want to be overly grim, but the fact is there were thousands of people were in these two buildings.
Again, 50,000 people come to work in those buildings. Many thousands more pass through those buildings every day. There are retail shops on the lower floors of the Trade Center.
It is where the PATH trains from New Jersey come in.
Correct. The trains, the commuter trains coming from the other side of the river from New Jersey come in and drop off and pick up their passengers. So it is an extraordinarily busy area. It is also an area, for a number of reasons, rich in symbolism to this city and to the country.
Passed me down this area, and I walked with him as he was talking on the cell phone. I said, "What was it?" And he said, "Car bomb." And when I asked him to elaborate, he said, "No time, no time." And he continued to walk forward. The concern is that there are so many emergency so many emergency vehicles and emergency personnel that went down into that World Trade Center area, obviously cordoning it off and trying to keep people out of there. But clearly they would have been right in that path of not only the falling debris, but also that incredible, powerful cloud that just engulfed us. And I think if you heard me earlier, I told you the only way for us to escape it at the time was to break down the entrance to an apartment building just off the street. We had to break through the glass and get in through the second door to breathe. We were followed by a police officer as well who was struggling to breathe, and then a security guard who worked in the World Trade Center as well. And he had been trying to walk northward away from that mess behind us. Could you just clear back so that the camera can take a view down there? Thanks. You can shoot down and you can see some of the activity while I'm reporting this to you. We also were able to interview a security guard who was working on the concourse in the plaza between the two World Trade Centers when the first explosion happened, when the first plane hit the first tower. He said he was dispatched down to the concourse to clear people away and to try to move people out of the World Trade Center. And then he said that's when the second explosion happened, which of course was the second tower. He said everything went pitch black. There was a cloud of smoke and a cloud of debris. When we happened upon him, it was extremely strange. He was all dressed in his black security uniform, but he was fully covered from head to toe in gray and wandering aimlessly. He said he was okay.
Hold on
we asked
one
him if he'd been
second,
attended
if you
to.
can, because Pat Dawson, who is not far from you, is being asked to move.
All right, Tom, we've just been told we're being evacuated. You can see all the emergency workers walking north on the West Side Highway in New York. We've been told by firefighters here that there is a report of a bomb in this building. This is a school, a high school right here. And as you can see, they're moving everybody away from this building. They've said that there's a bomb in the building. They are evacuating us north now. That is according to firefighters on the scene. And we're going to move out of here right now just to keep ourselves safe. So we're going to start walking north ourselves. But that's what we're being told by New York City firefighters here, that there were reports of a bomb in that high school right there. It's called Stuyvesant High School. And so we are walking north to get out of the way. You can see just to my left here, these are even the ambulances which were down there are being moved north. The firefighters are being moved north. Everybody is being moved north. We're being asked by the police now to go north and get out of the way. Officer, do you have any idea of what the problem is?
There's a report of a secondary device possibly in the area of this school, so they're going to move everybody back as a precaution.
Secondary device meaning a bomb?
Possibly.
Okay, and where did that report come from? Was it called in?
It came in over our radios, and it's reported through our supervisors on down, so we're pulling everybody back.
And that's in the Stuyvesant High School right there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Officer McQuaid. That's Officer McQuaid of New York City Emergency Service. I'm sorry, what's it? Yeah, well, I don't think there was anyone in the school, Katie, this morning. At this point, I think everybody had been evacuated from here probably when the first events took place early this morning, just because of the fact that it's so close to the World Trade Center. Most of these buildings around here have been evacuated, so I would imagine, I never saw any kids going into that school this morning, so I'm going to presume that they never even allowed them to get to school this morning, and that anywhere that were here at 8:45 were probably moved out almost within moments after this the crash took place, because it literally is only about 10 blocks north of here, and I haven't seen any students coming in or out. Katie, Tom.
All right, that's Pat Dawson outside the Trade Center as they get moved back because of fears of another explosion. We want to catch you up to date now with the airplane situation. Airplanes apparently were used in these attacks today, commercial jetliners. And I want to remind you, you're watching NBC News coverage here on MSNBC. An FBI spokesman says the planes involved 2 American flights. American Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, involved in hitting one of the trade towers. Also, American 77 was involved apparently in one of the attacks, at least was hijacked. We don't know where that plane ended up. 2 United airplanes, United 175, that was scheduled Boston to Los Angeles. I just checked United's website. That plane supposedly left Boston at 8:14 this morning Eastern Time. Also United 93 from Newark to San Francisco. According to the United website, that plane left at 8:42. We do not know, except with American 11, exactly which plane ended up where. But according to this source from the FBI, those are the 4 commercial planes that have been involved in what is going on today. Now, we have been reporting another plane down some distance from Pittsburgh today. According to reports, and I want to stress this is coming from the affiliate there who got this from the scanner, so let's put this in perspective. But that plane believed to have originated in Chicago and was headed to Cleveland with 90 people on board. No word on the airline. And I'm just seeing, crossing the Associated Press wires now, American Airlines says it has lost 2 aircraft carrying a total of 156 people. And just crossing the Associated Press, American Airlines confirming 2 of its airplanes involved, a total of 156 people on board. Rick Sanchez is in Lower Manhattan. Rick?
Yeah, there have been, Lester, am I on? Is that you?
Yeah, Rick, go ahead. Lester.
Yeah, Lester, there have been about four explosions here since about 11 o'clock. The most recent about 2 minutes ago that seemed to shake the ground that we're on. We're about a block and a half away from what used to be the World Trade Center. The area is completely surrounded in soot and ash. Firefighters and rescue officials are still really trying to get their act together. They're not quite sure how to approach this situation. They just did finally set up a command center. It's going to be set up at Chambers and West. They also have a triage center set up. That's at the local high school here, Stuyvesant High School, which is, as you know, not far from the World Trade Center. And there are still people in this area who are doing everything they possibly can.
Rick, I just want to stop you there. As the information's coming fast and furious, that's the same high school that we've just been reporting is apparently being evacuated for fears of a secondary device, another device. So even as you're reporting that, things are moving fast and furious. It's got to be incredibly difficult to figure out where safe ground is right now.
Well, we've been told, as a matter of fact, moments ago to try and get out of this area because they're moving everyone out. And their fear is, of course, that there are gas leaks, natural gas in this area that either fed into or out of the buildings that have exploded. And now those lines are open and may rupture. We're not positive and can't confirm exactly what has caused those 4 explosions we told you about at the beginning of our report. But there is reason to believe that they may be caused by some type of gas explosion or natural gas leaks in this area, and firefighters are extremely cautious as they try and work into the area. What they're doing now, Lester, is lining up on some of the adjacent streets and setting up, as what you know from covering stories like this, field forces, where they tell them, don't go out and freelance, don't go out on your own. Stay in a group, we'll move into an area, and we'll somehow move in little by little. Meanwhile, firefighters and rescue officials, I just saw them come in as well,
Room 55,
and they
please.
had what appeared to be picks, axes, and other devices that they're going to be using perhaps to try and extricate people that might still be in there. The items that they had were handheld items that they were probably going to be using, we would assume, in some form to get into the area. However, at this point, we're only about a block away, and it does not appear that they're moving into the area.
Rick, I'm going to interrupt you here as we get new pictures in. These pictures from Washington, I believe it's tape or live. This is taped just a short time ago. This is the best look we've had at the damage at the Pentagon, where another plane apparently made a suicide plunge or was driven into a suicide plunge. There's the Capitol in the background. This just across the river in Virginia. The Pentagon struck sometime after 9 o'clock this morning as well. And again, this is tape of efforts to fight the fire there at the Pentagon. This following the 2 attacks earlier.
Any one of the other many correspondents, producers and others with CNN and our colleagues at the other news networks. And I would just remind you that CNN right now has producers, correspondents all around the world who are watching for any more information that we can bring you at this point. As Aaron and Jeff Greenfield have been saying in the last few minutes, everything we have right now is fragmentary. We are simply reporting to you what we are learning from police, from the federal government, from the CIA, from David Ensor, from our other correspondents.
Prayers go out to the families of all involved. One other thing, customers who wish to receive information about relatives, if you have
of reciting that somebody had claimed responsibility, someone had denied responsibilities, the Palestinian Authority in the person of Yasser Arafat was very quick to come along and offer condolences to the people of the United States. To put as much distance between himself, because he gets blamed for a lot in the Middle East, certainly by the Israelis. Do you have any feel for how complicated an operation this is and who might be able to mount it, or are we just blowing in the wind at the moment?
You're not blowing in the wind at all, Peter. This is so complicated an operation that one reason we weren't ready is that no one believed there was an organization with either the intention or the capability to execute something like this. People talk about bin Laden's group, but it's an umbrella group. It is the elements under it that would have had to do it, not bin Laden himself. We have talked about Iraq, but Iraq's operations have never been particularly sophisticated. We've talked about Iran, but while we can identify that the Iranian leadership was involved in Al-Khobar, we've never seen anything this ambitious. And groups outside the Middle East, like the Japanese Red Brigades, have never come close to this level of operation. I think it's also important to note that we talked earlier about bin Laden being Arab. Bin Laden's operations now have many elements that are not Arab. They are Islamist extremists. They involve groups from countries like Pakistan and other elements. And what we've never seen is a level of coordination among all of
our country on this day.
Taliban here, and he's recently issued a short statement. In that statement, he criticizes what he called an act of terrorism, and he was very explicit. He said that Osama bin Laden was not responsible for it, and he said that all he wanted for his country was peace and peace for other countries in the world. And he went on to say that he believed Osama bin Laden could not have been responsible for such a complex act of terrorism. And he also said that if Afghanistan is a poor country, and therefore he believed there was no way that Afghanistan could be involved in such a complicated act of terrorism. Judy?
Nick, help us understand, who is Moore Omar, the gentleman you're quoting?
He is the spiritual leader of the Taliban. The Taliban run 95% of Afghanistan. They control the capital, Kabul. They control most of Afghanistan, the south of Afghanistan. Mullah Omar lives in the south of Afghanistan in the spiritual capital, which is the ethnic area that he comes from, the Pashtun area around Kandahar. There are ministries of the Taliban here in Kabul. The foreign minister is here in Kabul at the moment. He is often based in Kandahar as well. And there are other ministry officials also based in Kabul. But the direction for Afghanistan, the direction for the ministries, the key decisions are all made in Kandahar, and Mullah Omar is the focal point of all those decisions. It is to him that a key group of ministers would go with a problem, with an issue, and it is he that would decide on any given issue. He is the final arbiter here of law and of justice. Judy?
Nick, where is it believed that Osama bin Laden is in Afghanistan?
That is a very difficult question to answer. Osama bin Laden, his location is kept extremely secret. As foreign media traveling around Afghanistan, one is often watched and an eye is kept on us by various ministries to ensure that we don't go searching around the country. Our movements around the country are generally restricted to main cities that are agreed in advance by the authorities. So it's very difficult to gauge where Osama bin Laden is. It is understood that he travels around at night. It's understood that he has operated out of various training camps that were built to help train Mujahideen fighters to fight the Soviet occupation in the 1980s. Those are based, some of them towards the border with Pakistan in an area called Host. Those were the training camps that were hit in the 1998 cruise missile attack on Afghanistan. It's also rumored that Osama bin Laden spends some time close to Kandahar, close to the spiritual leader of the Taliban, Mullah Omar. But to exactly put a fix on his location is a very, very difficult thing to do. He works by extreme secrecy. The very few journalists that have been able to meet with him over the last few years are always held at a location and taken blindfold to another location where they can interview him. So people generally, when they meet him, they don't know exactly where they are. They wait there, he arrives, he departs, then they're free to leave. He lives by extreme secrecy here.
All right, CNN's Nick Robertson joining us, as you could see, from Kabul, Afghanistan, the country run by the religious group, the Taliban, the group that has been suspected, believed for some time of harboring Osama bin Laden. Thank you very much, Nick. And again, we apologize for the delay in the audio there. It is because Nick is on this video phone, which is a new device that we're using, and there is always a delay. Tends to be a delay in audio. I want to bring in now our national security correspondent, David Ensor. You're looking at pictures as I do this from New York City in the moments following the worst of today's attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City, Lower Manhattan, where you can see people running in sheer terror away from either one of the two airplane crashes into the top of the World Trade Center, both towers of which collapsed later on, to the utter horror of people watching both live and on television across the United States and around the world, for that matter. New York City, the subject of the worst terrorism ever to strike the United States. So while we certainly mourn the loss here in Washington at the Pentagon, the airplane that crashed into the Pentagon, the other airplane that crashed near Pittsburgh, both of them commercial airliners with civilians on board, the loss of life in New York City is utterly unbelievable. And just picking up, as we look at these pictures, picking up on what Nick Robertson was saying from Afghanistan, even as the leaders of the Taliban deny any role in this, an Arab journalist based in London is quoted today to the Associated Press as saying that followers of Osama bin Laden warned 3 weeks ago they were going to carry out this sort of an attack. New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani joining us once again. Mayor Giuliani.
The tragedy that we're all undergoing right now is something that we've had nightmares about, but probably thought wouldn't happen. My heart goes out to all of the innocent victims of this horrible and vicious act of terrorism, acts of terrorism. And our focus now has to be on saving as many lives as possible. We have hundreds of police officers and firefighters who are engaging in rescue efforts in Lower Manhattan. I want to thank Governor Patel.
The people of New York are not only the freest and most diverse people in the world, we're also, I believe, the most capable of rising to meet the challenges of this type of attack. And right now, we want New Yorkers to remain calm, to go about their business, to appreciate the fact that everything to provide for their safety is being done, to appreciate that everything that can be done to provide for the health and the needs of the people who are still at risk is being done, and that we will continue to work to make sure that we get through this as strongly and quickly as possible. I want to thank the federal administration. Secretary Thompson has been on the phone with me a number of times, as well as the President, for what they are offering and prepared to do. And we're just confident that, while this is a horrible attack and one that is despicable and really unthinkable in its magnitude, we will get through this, and we will continue to have a great and free country, state, and society.
Do we know the number of casualties at this point, sir?
I don't think we really want to speculate about that. The number of casualties will be more than any of us can bear ultimately. And I don't think we want to speculate on the number of casualties. The effort now has to be to save as many people as possible. And I don't think we will know the answer to that until sometime tomorrow or the next day.
Were there large numbers of firefighters?
There are a large number of firefighters and police officers who are in harm's way. And we don't know how many we've lost. But there's no doubt we've lost some firefighters and police officers.
Do you know anything about the cause of the explosions that brought the two buildings down yet? Was it caused by the planes or by something else?
We
We
believe that it was caused by the after effects of the planes hitting the buildings. We don't know of an additional explosion.
Report that 8 planes have been hijacked, 4 have only been accounted for. What about the remaining 4? And is there any possibility that there could be bombs on the ground planted by...
We have no specific information to that effect. Obviously, the city is now closed. The airspace around the city is closed, and we are on heightened alert. But we have no specific information suggesting any further attack.
Can you tell us where the planes came from?
I think to give the people of New York confidence, to show that the federal government is standing with us, and to just to make certain that nothing further happens. This has been a very, very difficult and traumatic day for the people of the United States and the people of the city. And I think that it's an act that shows that the federal government is going to do everything they can to support us and help us.
Can you give us an idea of the extent of the rescue effort that's going on right now along Manhattan? What the scope of this thing, this operation?
There are over 1,000 rescue workers, probably about 2,000 that are deployed, trying to get into the buildings, trying to find people, trying to search for people. The governor and I spoke a couple of hours ago. The governor has deployed the National Guard to relieve them because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon. But right now they don't want to leave because they're searching for innocent citizens, and they're searching for some of their brothers and sisters.
Are you finding survivors?
Yes, we have some numbers that we can give you. We have 1,500 people at Liberty State Park who were evacuated, described as walking wounded. They were evacuated by ferry and other means. There are about 600 as of about 15 minutes ago in local hospitals that we account for, 600 people that are being treated in local hospitals. And there are 150 in particular that were critical, that were moved by EMS. New York City has 170 hospitals. So we have a lot of hospitals, and we're utilizing all of them. Probably the one that was the hardest hit was St. Vincent's Hospital. And I would like to just single them out and commend them, because as I was rushing down there, after the first plane hit, and before the second, they were already deploying people on the street. I could see the doctors and nurses outside getting ready to receive people. And that was before the second plane actually hit the World Trade Center.
What was your experience down there?
Also blood donations. We have several sites for blood donations. 153 East 53rd Street, 66 in Amsterdam, which is the Red Cross, and 310 East 67th Street. If people want to do something and they can donate blood, that's going to help not just today, but tomorrow and the next day. This relief effort is going to take some time.
Mr. Mayor, you were one of the first people down there. Can you describe the scene in your own words, what you saw down there?
I don't know that I'm really able to describe it. It was the most horrific scene I've ever seen in my whole life. We saw the World Trade Center in flames, a big gaping hole all the way on the top of it. We could see people jumping from the top of the building. And then we went into Barclay Street, 75 Barclay Street, I think it was, and we were there when the building collapsed. And it collapsed in part on 75 Barclay Street. So we were trapped in the building for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, trying to get out different exits. We finally went through a basement and came out 100 Park Place.
Did you ever fear for your own safety, sir?
Sure, yeah.
What went through your mind?
I don't think anything went through my mind other than making sure that we all remained calm and found an exit and just tried to figure out the most intelligent thing to do. Probably the same thing that went through the minds of 10,000 other New Yorkers who I could see on the streets, and I really have to commend them. If you really want to know what New Yorkers are all about, you just watch the way in which they handle themselves. They didn't panic. They moved deliberately. They moved swiftly. But they didn't hurt each other. They helped each other. I mean, these are just the most wonderful people in the world.
Do we know anything about the composition of that dust that blankets lower Manhattan? Is there any asbestos or any hazardous material in that dust?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Mr. Mayor, I got reports of a gas explosion related to this. Are you aware of that? There was a gas leak or possible
We don't believe it. We don't believe that's the case.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us anything about where the planes come from, where the aircraft came from?
Bill Diamond reminds me that we've turned off the gas in the city buildings, just to be certain.
Can you tell us
as a
anything
precaution?
about where these aircraft came from? There was a report that may have been hijacked in Boston.
I think we should leave. I think we should leave that up to the federal government to yes, we do have some information, but I think we should leave that up to the federal government to release that information. Our focus is on the relief efforts, and
Governor, do you
What about security for
do
the
you
rest
think
of
there
the
should be
city
any
now that this is
retaliation on the
happening?
part of the United States for what happened here in this country, both in New York, Washington, and other places?
First step right now, Marcia, is to make sure we do everything to help those people who need our support, and whether they're injured or still trapped in buildings. The second thing is to make sure at the same time we're providing the maximum security against possible additional incidents. But clearly, this is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life, and we must retaliate and go after those who perpetuated this heinous crime against the people of America.
Mayor, this is
Cheryl,
compared to Pearl
Cheryl,
Harbor. Do you consider this to be an act of war? This has been compared.
I'll do both. I'll do
This has
both.
been compared to Pearl Harbor. Do you consider this to
This
be
is
an
a
act of war?
this is a vicious, unprovoked, horrible attack on innocent men, women, and children. It's one of the most heinous acts, certainly in world history. And as the governor said, and I said to the president, we fully and completely support him in any action that he has to take in order to make an example out of the people who are responsible for this.
Is it an act of war in your mind?
I don't know that I want to use those words. I think the president is the one that has to respond, and I think what he has to know is that all of us in New York support him, and support him completely in the efforts that he's going to have to make over the next couple of days, week, and to make a point that people can't do this. You can't attack innocent men, women, and children. And ultimately, I'm totally confident that American democracy and American rule of law will prevail. And the people of New York are going to help to demonstrate that over the next couple of days.
Anybody take responsibility for this? Any group take responsibility at this time? And what is the city doing to safeguard the citizens now that something like this happens?
Well, first of all, I don't know of anyone that's taken responsibility for it at this time. And secondly, the New York
As a result of this, so it's going to be devastating to Wall Street for quite some time. Internationally, the markets are all selling off quite a bit, as you might suspect, on the heels of something like this.
Would you call that just simply knee-jerk reaction then, Jim?
I would call it a knee-jerk reaction, and typically, now this is unprecedented. We've never had anything like this, so you can't really gauge history, but typically when you have a knee-jerk reaction to a devastating event, it's very short-term in nature, 1 or 2 days, and then Wall Street seems to go back to the business that it's used to doing. So I would expect that you would see a knee-jerk reaction, severe sell-off whenever they do reopen Wall Street, but one that would be very short-term.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
Do you have any indication when that might be, Jim? When they might reopen Wall Street?
They have not given us any indication.
The schools, the channel.
Our prayers and our thoughts are with all of those families tonight. Pam Harris is out at DFW Airport right now. Pam, what kind of update do you have for us?
Well, Jane, things are relatively calm here, and we have been here for a little while now. As I mentioned earlier about the eeriness of the quiet sky.
If parents aren't there to pick up the young children, then the children will be taken to a center, and the parents will be notified to come and pick them up. The children who have Metro cards, who normally travel on the subway, will be able to do that. The subways are functioning in 4 of the 5 boroughs, and can we get an update, Joe, on how the subway's doing in Manhattan?
All the lettered lines are working.
And in Manhattan?
In Manhattan lines, all the lettered lines.
All the lettered lines are working, including in Manhattan, and throughout the rest of the city, public transportation is normal. So the children should be able to return from school in the normal fashion. And if any children don't have parents to pick them up, then we'll hold them, let the parents know, and then the parents can come and pick them up.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned you were on Barclay Street. What's the radius of damage that's been affected? How many other side streets around the world?
I don't think we know yet. The whole area of Lower Manhattan has been very much affected by it.
How many police and fire are involved? Like how many all NYPD off-duty officers, as they come in, or like
all NYPD and FDNY officers are on. And again, thanks to the governor and the way in which the state reacted, we will have 1,600 National Guard to relieve them over a period of time, so we can get some relief for them.
If anybody's looking for someone that may have been in the World Trade Center or in and around that area, what should they do? How can they get information?
We're going to give you numbers so that we can try to help coordinate that. Individual businesses have already done that, but we will as soon as we can find some time, from the relief efforts, give you a number in which people can call, and then we can direct them to the right place.
Have there been any reports of looting or anything like that? Any lawlessness, Mayor?
There have been no reports of lawlessness, no reports of looting. As I said, we saw a lot of people that were part of the escape effort. And they seem to be conducting themselves in a very, very sensible way, a very deliberate way. They seem to be helping each other. So I don't think we have any reports like that at all.
So the only National Guard we'll see will be in Lower Manhattan in the bomb site area. They won't be patrolling the rest of Manhattan.
No, the purpose of it is to help with the relief effort. We're gonna need the help of the state, surrounding areas with heavy-duty equipment.
When will they be arriving?
National Guard troops, some have arrived already, and we expect to have up to close to 2,000 between the National Guard and the state police by later this evening.
Mayor, bridges and tunnels will have to stay closed.
I think everything is closed for now. And then maybe in about an hour or two, we can give you an update on what the plan will be for tomorrow.
We saw a lot of lightly injured people walking out of the area because obviously the emergency services were needed for the very seriously injured. People come with us, some people had difficulty breathing. Is there any health advice to give to people who were caught in this thing, who are not necessarily at risk of losing their life, but
I think, obviously, if you feel ill or you feel that you've been affected by it, you should go to a hospital and get checked out. But if it's just discomfort that you feel, then you can do basically what we did, was to wash our faces off and get rid of the clothes and get to an area where you can breathe in fresh air.
How many people were in the World Trade Center at the time of this attack?
I mean, it was business had already started. It was right before 9 o'clock. I don't know.
Tens of thousands?
Yes. Approximately. Someone just gave me a number of approximately 10,000, but that's a guess.
How long will the city remain on a heightened state of alert?
Until we're told not to. I mean, until the FBI and the police department and the federal government tells us that we shouldn't. Right now, the city is should be on a state of alert. Now, instead of frightening people, that should make people feel more confident that everything is being done to keep things secure. And again, let me emphasize that the reason for the National Guard, because I heard the question before, is to help with the relief effort, not because there's any fear of any other problems in the city right now.
Mr. Mayor, can you tell us about the other public buildings, City Hall, One Police Plaza? When will it be safe for you to return?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. Hopefully soon, but I don't know the answer to that.
And we heard reports that One Police Plaza was evacuated. Was that true?
No, the command center is open.
And it was never.
We have people in the command center right now.
It never was
There
evacuated.
have also been reports of large loss of life among the police and firemen who were sent there to rescue people. How accurate are those reports?
There is no question that we lost police officers and firefighters, and some that I know personally, and all of us here know personally, that we're very worried about. And we're not going to know the answer to that until much later. And maybe we should just close now and give you a briefing later. And I would just ask everyone, I talked to Cardinal Egan before, because he's at St. Vincent's Hospital. Everybody should, in their own way, say a prayer and ask God for help and for assistance, and also ask God to give us the strength to overcome this, because I know we're going to need strength to overcome it. And I want the people of New York to be an example to the rest of the country and the rest of the world that terrorism can't stop us. American democracy is much stronger than a vicious, cowardly terrorist, and we're going to overcome.
Thank you. Well done, man. Do we know when the next briefing will be?
Rare exhortation these days by a public official recommending that the people of the city of New York say a prayer for not only the city, but those who have perished today in this coordinated terrorist attack. On the phone with us, been very kind to hold while we have listened to the New York City Mayor's first extended briefing, is Congressman Bob Stump, Republican of Arizona, not just a member of Congress, but chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. And Mr. Chairman, what has today's horrific series of incidents taught you?
Well, I think that, and I hope that it wakes up some of these people who think this country is not under threat from terrorists or other means. Perhaps it will help us. We've tried to increase our human intelligence assets, but through increased funding, we have not been able to do that. If you don't see a shiny plane or a new tank sitting over there, people are a little reluctant to vote. We are desperately.
Though, for the situation in New York,
where things were just getting underway at the World Trade Center, the largest office building in Manhattan. The Twin Towers, 100 stories, have both fallen after 2 hijacked jetliners were flown into them, flying bombs that brought those buildings down. Our Jim Angle is in Washington and has a late reaction from there. Jim?
Hello, John. Well, what we have to report from here is about the president. Now, you know the president left his location in Florida, wound up giving a short videotaped speech from Louisiana. The problem here is that his political advisors would like him to return to Washington and take control in order to tamp down any sense of panic among the public. But the Secret Service does not want the president to return to Washington because they fear they cannot guarantee his safety. Now, the Secret Service would prefer the president to go to NORAD, which is in Colorado. It's a mountain that has I'm sorry, the word just in is that the president has landed at an Air Force base in Nebraska. Now, the president is flying around the country while his advisors argue with the Secret Service over whether or not it's safe to return to Washington. Now, obviously, he will land at safe locations, Air Force bases, to refuel and to figure out where things are. The president can do everything he needs to do from Air Force One, but the fact is his political advisors would like him to return to Washington because they want the president to be able to take charge in an obvious way to eliminate any
for additional collapse.
What about the prospect, as the governor's announced, of the National Guard being called into New York for an act of terrorism? Is this anything you ever envisioned, and what will they do?
Well, in fact, that's the question, John, what they'll do. I would imagine that they will help support the police department, the fire department, provide logistical support, manpower, help with search and rescue. Whether or not they'll be used for law enforcement purposes, traffic control, things like that, I think I've not been privy to those discussions, so I don't know. But that's certainly possible.
Leading up to the millennium, you personally designed a series of exercises where a disaster would unfold and they would respond to it, a tabletop exercise, a field exercise, and then another disaster, and then another, to make it more and more difficult to stretch the resources to the limit. Was that worst case scenario design that you put together to see if the city could handle such a momentous disaster anything close to this, or have a component like this?
Yeah, you know, as we were planning for the millennium, we were planning for millions of people in Times Square and for the potential of something happening there. And we had to look at where all those resources would come from.
So did you have, in your design, did you have a truck bomb go off and then something else happen?
We had a sequence of events, both explosions, chemicals, biological incidents, and we looked at various types of terrorist events. And, you know, I think that what you're seeing here today...
Either they don't know or they're holding back on that. We are told that there will be substantive intelligence briefings for members of the intelligence committees later this afternoon, but at this point about all they know is that these were well-coordinated attacks, well-coordinated, well-planned out. At this point, it's our understanding that members of Congress have been given no information as to who specifically might be behind these attacks. We should also add, and these intelligence sources pointed out to us, that security forces, American forces...
Planning.
Is there some hint?
This. And we shouldn't make any snap judgments. We need to make sure that we understand exactly who's responsible. If that takes a couple of days, if it takes a couple of weeks, we want to make sure we make the right decision and that we don't tip our hand off either in terms of how we're going to respond. This should be a surprise to whoever's responsible.
And Congressman, thankfully, both sides are, as you said, more than united as we approach trying to solve this crisis.
And we thank you very much for...
As of this hour.
It is 3 o'clock in the East. It is noon in the Pacific time zone, and America has been under attack this day, the 11th of September, 2001. A smoke cloud continues to billow from south of Manhattan, where you can see what happened shortly after 9 this morning. The second of 2 hijacked airplanes plowed into the side of the World Trade Center building you see there. The earlier tower already had been hit by another hijacked airplane. We understand that those planes from United and American Airlines. This is the collapse of the second tower that was hit. It was the first one to collapse, perhaps because the structural damage there was so much more severe and so much lower down. But the first of the towers collapsed around 10 o'clock this morning. Not long after that, within 30 minutes or so, the second tower collapsed and smashed into the south wall of the Pentagon, blowing a 100 to 150-foot hole into the side of the building and setting a fire that continues to burn at this hour. Now, all government buildings largely have been evacuated in Washington as a result, as a security precaution. The president, who had been scheduled to make an address in Florida, was hustled out of there, put aboard Air Force One, and flown to a secure site, Shreveport, Louisiana. He made a brief statement there, then got back in the air, and at last report was on the ground at an Air Force base in Nebraska. We are looking now live at these pictures from southern Manhattan, where you should be on a normal day. You would be seeing the World Trade Center standing tall and proud above all of those buildings gathered there at the tip of Manhattan. Instead, all you see is that ugly brown cloud of soot, smoke, and dust that is still emanating from the rubble left behind after this horrific day in America.
In certain major cities, New York and Washington, D.C. in particular, you may see fighter jets patrolling the skies. They've been scrambled to protect those who were not already hurt in these devastating accidents. Let us make clear what we have going on is the situation at the FAA. There is a national ground stop put in place. This means all flights are completely grounded. The soonest it might be lifted is sometime around noon tomorrow. For the meantime, the FAA is trying to track some 10 to 12 international flights that were some bound for like Honolulu and other places. Those are still being tracked. There were some 40 to 50 domestic flights that were already in the air at the time of these terrorist attacks. They have all been safely grounded. They've all been accounted for. However, we do have 4 flights that have been lost. American Airlines Flight 77, bound from Dulles to Los Angeles, 77 passengers, 6 crew members lost. American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles, 81 passengers and 11 crew lost. United Airlines from Newark to San Francisco, Flight 93, 38 passengers and 7 crew lost. Also, United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles, 56 passengers and 9 crew lost. We go now to Shepard Smith, who has more information to bring in. Shepard?
Linda, I'm outside the Fox News studios here on the corner of 47th and 6th Avenues in Midtown Manhattan. As all of this happened in the morning, there is at least one bit of good news.
Good afternoon. Steve Eager in the Fox 4 News studios here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Again, there is a local effect here by the horrible attacks that we've seen in New York and the East Coast. DFW Airport shut down.
Pickup is okay. It is an excused absence for children. Once again, no extracurricular activities. I went out to one school in Fort Worth today and spoke to some frightened parents and children, and what I heard was in some cases chilling.
It's scary. I feel that the world is going to finish, but I hope it's not.
Mariela Contreras outside Eastern Hills High School in Fort Worth.
But we are not closing the schools.
But Paula Morrow came to get one child even as her thoughts.
Intelligence issues for us is at the Pentagon. John, what have you got?
A whole plate full of things, Peter. First of all, we've been talking throughout the day about possible ship movements, American ship movements. It is true that 2 aircraft carriers, 5 other combatants, and a hospital ship are now all heading north along the Atlantic seaboard toward New York. No decision has yet been made about exactly what to do with those ships when they get there, but of course aircraft carriers have a very large hospital capability, so they could be used for that. I think it is a responsive measure. Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, after the attack on the Pentagon, went immediately to the gash that you see behind me here when the very first destruction was detected and helped pull some people out of the rubble.
He is now in what is called the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, and he intends to stay there indefinitely until all forces around the world have been secured. All forces around the globe at this point are at ThreatCon Delta, which is the highest level of threat condition that American troops can be in. One of the difficulties with the fire and the rescue effort here in the Pentagon, Peter, is we have seen continuous outbreaks of fires within the different levels of the Pentagon, and it has been extremely difficult for search and rescue people to get inside the Pentagon. It was 5 hours before the first people were able to get into some of the rubble to try to begin to pull out people who may have been trapped. The fire in the Pentagon was described as an inferno by those people who were in some of the worst areas. The evacuation in parts of the Pentagon was very orderly. Some of it was complete chaos, as you might expect.
Okay, John, thanks very much. John McCarthy at the Pentagon. We just take a quick look at John there. Jackie, there for a second. I want to put John on camera for a second because earlier today you described, you just turn around and take a look at that gash in the Pentagon there and describe again for us. You think it's what, 200 feet wide, 200 to 300 feet wide?
It is at least 200 or 300 feet wide, Peter. Just imagine a very large commercial aircraft ramming into this space. The Pentagon is built like a blockhouse, as you know, during World War II. It is a very substantial building, and this aircraft, traveling at between 150 and 200 miles an hour, penetrated deeply into the rings of the Pentagon, almost to the center. The destruction on the 5 floors that are above ground is considerable. One of the admirals was briefing us earlier that he felt that the section that was hit was one of the areas that was being repaired. We now believe that is not true. It is an area with Navy and Marine Corps personnel, but also the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Okay, thanks very much, John McCarthy at the Pentagon. We'll come back to you. On the phone with us at the moment is the former CIA Director, James Woolsey. Mr. Woolsey, there's so much to ask you about at a moment like this in terms of your experience, but as our political director, or actually that's not true, as a former senior White House official said a short while ago to one of us, there's going to be a hellacious amount of finger pointing at the moment. What's gone wrong here?
Well, one thing that's gone wrong, Peter, I think, is that for some years now, we have adopted a theory that terrorism first was likely just to be sort of a pickup team, these loose associations of terrorists inspired, say, by the Blind Sheikh in New York. This was the thought in the 2 bombings, one attempted, one real in New York back in the early 90s. And then the Clinton administration veered off into saying everything looked like it might be Osama bin Laden. It's important that we realize there is a real possibility when you have something this devastating and well coordinated that there could be state action of some sort behind it. Now, I don't know that that's the case, and I won't say that it's the case, but there is at least a plausible case that there was Iraqi government involvement in the World Trade Center bombing back in 1993. This all has to do with the identity, the true identity of Ramzi Youssef, who was the mastermind who's in prison out in Colorado now. At his sentencing, the judge said, we still don't really know who you are. And if there was a chance that there was Iraqi government involvement in that, since Youssef was the mastermind of the World Trade Center and of a bombing plot in the Pacific, which he was working on when he was caught, to have a lot of American airlines in the Pacific blown up. What happened today is a sort of amalgam of the earlier 2 Ramzi Youssef plots. It's at least, I think, interesting that that's the case, and if some of the observers, Laurie Milroy and others, are correct, that there's a reasonable chance that he was, in fact, involved with the Iraqi government, there could also be a chance that the Iraqi government is involved here, even if bin Laden or other terrorist groups are as well.
Can I just ask you just a couple of really elementary questions about intelligence? You've just done something on the air which strikes me as what intelligence officers do when they sit down to try to figure out what the heck is going on. Is that in fact, what you're trying to do at the moment? You called it an amalgam of 2 plots. Is that how it works at the moment?
Well, this is nothing but circumstantial evidence that I've been talking about, but it's interesting circumstantial information anyway. And yes, that's the sort of thing that I think intelligence officers need to do. Part of the
very clearly if he is the perpetrator. The second thing, Dan, is we need to get the international community, our allies, our friends, developing countries, to recognize that terrorism is a worldwide threat, that this
parts of justice.
Now, you mentioned governments and individuals.
Because of the incidents that have occurred in our nation today, we're evacuating the building.
As we can save in this terrible, terrible situation. Second thought is that, you know, since '93 with the bombing of the World Trade Center the first time, people that hate us and hate what we stand for and hate our way of life have demonstrated that over and over again. I don't have to go through all the different events, but we all know what they are. And today they've brought that terrible hatred to the United States of America, and we as a country, as a nation, need to stand together. I agree totally with Judge Schultz, who I admire tremendously, that we need to go find out who these people are, and with respect to collateral damage, we need to not let this happen again. And I think this puts about 5 exclamation points on why we in this country need a sophisticated, dedicated, high morale team of intelligence agencies and law enforcement that work together. Not that if it was any better than it was the last 5 years, I'm not saying it wasn't good, but it needs to be the best and continue to be the best.
But you're suggesting it has not been good enough.
Well, in a free society, you know, it's virtually impossible to know everything about every bunch of cowards and crazy people that populate the world, unfortunately. But we need to get as close to that as possible without changing our way of life. And I think that exclamation point just hits home today, and we need to stop this. We need not to change our way of life. We need to find out who did this, and I'll tell you right now, that's a short list of people. And our government knows pretty much what that short list is. They're putting the final touches, I'm sure, and will over the course of the next few hours, next few days, and we need to do something about it.
Sir, thank you for your time today. Appreciate joining. We have shown you a number of times the video of this second plane that at 9:08 hit the Trade Center. We have, I believe, some still pictures of that plane as it moved. I'm seeing them for the first time with you, so bear with us. You can see that in the first shot, the plane approaching the Trade Center. And here in the second frame, you can see in the front, I believe what we saw there was the plumes of smoke and fire from the hit on the first building. The plane now visibly closer to the Trade Center building. It is just the most extraordinary and painful thing to look at because you know what's happening. Mr. Kallstrom, are you able to see these pictures, by the way? Mr. Kallstrom?
Yes, I am.
Were you able to see those?
I was able to see that, yes.
As you watch that, as you've seen that, I hear the anger builds, doesn't it?
It does. It certainly does build. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
I mean, we're trained in many ways, both of us, by profession, not to use words like unbelievable, and then you confront moments like this where, in fact, unbelievable is about the only word that seems to apply.
Yeah, I just can't, having lived through the tragedy of TWA Flight 800, which, as sad as that was, I mean, this is geometrically worse. And just thinking about the personal terror of all the people involved in this, the people on those planes. I'm sure there's teenagers and babies and adults and just normal people on those airplanes that suffered tremendous terrorism.
Yes, sir. It is hard to imagine what it must have been like on those 4 airplanes, because while the attacks on the buildings themselves happened quite quickly, these people in these airplanes were aware that something horrible was happening for perhaps an hour. The flight from Boston to New York, right around an hour, a little bit less. Clearly they knew this was something horrible had come into their lives. And they knew it for a long time.
That's probably true. And think about the fact that people obviously took control of the plane and knew something about flying one of these sophisticated fly-by-wire airplanes. I don't know how much they knew. They knew enough, obviously, to crash it into the building. I can't imagine any American pilot crashing an airplane into one of these buildings.
Now, sir,
even with a gun to their head, they wouldn't do that.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, that it is unimaginable to me, at least, that any pilot, no matter the circumstance, would have followed that order, crashed that plane into this building or that building. I don't know what they would have done, how they'd have dealt with it, but it is unimaginable they would have followed that order.
So you've got people that not only are willing to give up their lives for just a horrendously, in my view, stupid, cowardly act, but are sophisticated enough to fly a modern jet plane.
It was described by Secretary of State Shultz, and I don't know if you heard it, as an act of war against the United States. Do you see this as an act of war?
I think it's clearly an act of war. I think it's, in many ways, it's a different time, but it's everything that Pearl Harbor was and more. It just puts an exclamation point next to this dangerous world we live in, and the inability to appease people that are this demented with rhetoric. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. We can see what happened today. All peace-loving people of the world, all people that believe in democracy and freedom.
Be determined, but that is certainly a possibility. Somebody called from a cell phone who said he was a passenger on board that plane. He had locked himself in the restroom. He said it was not a hoax. They were being hijacked. But Flight 93 is no more. On any given day, the crash of that one aircraft with 45 people on board would dominate the news. But in a day like this, when the twin towers of the World Trade Center came under attack, also from hijacked airplanes, and when both of those towers came crumbling down, and when another hijacked aircraft slams into the wall of the Pentagon, that plane crash south of Pittsburgh is simply a footnote at this point, and that is an unbelievable comment to everything that's gone on today.
More international and national reaction. Word now from NATO that they have evacuated everyone from the Brussels headquarters, but they are planning an emergency meeting there. No start time, but it should be very shortly. Also, in the United States here, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as part of this federal response plan that's been put in place involving some 28 federal agencies, FEMA has sent out 8 urban search and rescue teams. They've activated them. They're going to New York City to search for any victims of the World Trade Center accident, the terrorist attack there. Also, the head of FEMA, Joe Albaugh, who was at a meeting in Blue Sky, Montana, has been turned around. He's been sent back to Washington, and he is on his way as we speak. Once again, also some of the other government precautions. Of course, all the national monuments in Washington, D.C. have been shut down. People have been evacuated. They will not be allowed there, and there's no idea yet when they'll be allowed back at any time. However, at the Pentagon, which for the most part was evacuated when the plane crash occurred there, there is the National Military Command Center. That's in the basement of the Pentagon. Personnel at last reporting were still there because they are heavily involved in coordinating a response. The National Security Agency, the CIA, those staff have been moved to an undisclosed location. This is all part of a national response, also part of the Pentagon being under what they call ThreatCon Delta. That is the highest threat alert possible at the Department of Defense. They are taking precautions. They also have, as we have reported, they have the leaders of Congress in a secure location as they formulate a response. The president, as you know, is at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. The vice president is safe. His wife is safe. Also, First Lady Laura Bush. They are safe, but they are being held in locations that the Secret Service at this hour is not disclosing.
2,400 people were killed in the attack on Pearl Harbor back in 1941. And Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska is saying, quote, this is the second Pearl Harbor. Newt Gingrich was on Fox News Channel earlier today saying very much the same thing. There is a tremendous amount of pressure on our nation's military leaders to come up with some kind of a target for a military response. However, as you can understand, until you know who brought about this kind of devastation, it's really too early to be talking about a military response. You're looking at live pictures. This is still what's going on in downtown Manhattan. This is the view from north to south, looking toward the spot, looking actually toward the Statue of Liberty and the spot there on the right of your screen where the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center stood. And that until about 10 o'clock Eastern time this morning. About 5 hours ago, they crumbled. This after they became the targets of some madmen with a grudge against America. Let's go to Rick Leventhal, who was there when all of this unfolded. Rick, it's good to see you still with us.
Thanks, John. We did have some frightening moments out here earlier this morning. I was in my office before 9 a.m. when I got the page that a plane had hit the World Trade Center, and I couldn't believe it. I thought there must have been some mistake, and sure enough, turned on the television, saw the video, jumped in a subway to come down here to Lower Manhattan. The train stopped. I had to get out of Canal Street, which isn't too far away, but a lot of people had to get out way before then, and they stopped train service. And you know, as I was walking down here towards where the World Trade Center is located, the Twin Towers were still standing, and there were people on every single street corner just staring up like they would be tourists. But these are locals, these are residents who were standing there staring at these two towers that were on fire with holes in the sides of the buildings. One of the most recognizable attractions in the world, the World Trade Center is, and it was a smoking hulk of wreckage, and again, people just staring at it. I can't believe that this is happening. So we get closer and closer, and with my press ID, I was able to get a block further west and basically 1 block to the north of the World Trade Center towers. When police said you cannot go any further, they stopped us there, and this is before the two buildings collapsed, and it was chaotic. There was police and rescue personnel all over the place, still trying to figure out what was going on. That's when we were hearing that there was a second plane that had hit the second tower, and everyone was trying to respond to that disaster, and people were swarming towards the buildings to try and rescue the people who were in the buildings. We then moved, our satellite truck parked a couple blocks further south of us here on Church Street, which basically runs right into the front of the World Trade Center buildings. You can't see it now because of all the smoke that's still in the street from where the buildings are burning, but we were there in the street virtually around the corner from the first tower when it collapsed. And we saw hundreds of people running up the street right at us, many of them yelling, screaming, run, the building's collapsing. I'm talking police officers included, running for their lives because this building was coming down. And what followed them was a gigantic cloud of smoke and debris, perhaps 100 feet high, rolling up Church Street, rolling north, as the building fell down and pushed all of its debris up the street. We took refuge inside the satellite truck, which was parked right there. We didn't know what was coming, what to expect. We jumped in the truck, waited for the smoke to clear. We got out, and some of the rescue personnel then began flooding back into this area. Shortly after that, we heard that the second tower was coming down, and it was very, very disturbing, to say the least, to hear that this second tower was going to collapse right next to us. And again, a similar scene played out where police officers and paramedics and emergency personnel and just women and children in the street who happened to be down here came running this way. We too dropped our camera and ran north to get out of the way of the clouds of smoke and debris, which were actually rolling up the side streets as well, being pushed north and then up the side streets. So each block that we passed, we saw yet more debris coming our way. A chaotic scene, to say the least. Since then, things have calmed down quite a bit. They've cleared the streets of almost all pedestrians, of all vehicle traffic, certainly, except for emergency vehicles, police and fire trucks and that sort of thing. We know that a triage has been set up right around the corner from us here. There was an ambulance staging area right next to us earlier today. Those ambulances were able to move down closer to the building. but we don't know if rescue personnel have been able to get into the rubble of the World Trade Center buildings themselves. I spoke with one friend of mine who was right by the buildings, who got close and saw blown out cars and rubble everywhere. Another guy who told me he tried to pull people out, or tried to at least assist in looking for people who might be trapped, said that one of the two towers are still some 20 stories standing, the other he described as a hole in the ground. Right now, again, things quite a bit calmer, very quiet, very serene out here almost, as people just basically wait to see what the next step will be. Again, the mayor saying that rescue and recovery is the primary goal here at this point, but certainly a very frightening moment. And we'll push in now. Maybe we can see there's a giant chunk of one of the two towers in the middle of Church Street, in front of the building, or where the building used to be. I don't know if you can see it through the smoke and the haze, but there is a large piece of the building in the middle of the street. Obviously, it's all been closed off, and again, the fire and rescue personnel on scene trying to get close to the building. But many of these firefighters believe they have lost coworkers in that debris, because after the initial strike, the two planes hitting the towers, all these emergency personnel responding to the scene were in the buildings and trying to clear people out of the area. And at that point, soon after that, is when the first tower collapsed. So there's a great fear that there may have been many emergency workers trapped at the base of that building when it did collapse. And possibly the most disturbing aspect of all of this is videotape that I don't think we can show you, but it's videotape of people who were on the very high floors of the World Trade Center. Okay, apparently we can show it because we've seen it, but it's the most disturbing videotape I've certainly ever seen of people who were completely without any hope. Trapped in the building with flames behind them and above them and below them, leaping from high floors to their deaths below. No word from here on the numbers of deaths or injured, but certainly we've been hearing as many as 10,000 people, and it'll be a while before they can get to many of them. Back to you in the studio.
Correspondent Rick Leventhal. Rick, thank you for the update. We have more information coming in as to the U.S. military response to this. Not only have some fairly innocuous places like any of the major national monuments been closed down, and even theme parks like the Disney World, Disneyland, they've been closed down too. But they also have closed the border between the United States and Canada, the border between the United States and Mexico. We are now just getting information that it is the USS John F. Kennedy and the USS George Washington that have now been deployed to New York Harbor. We also understand that there will be amphibious ships, guided missile cruisers, and guided missile destroyers that are all also being deployed. Where they will be sent, it's not clear right now. We are expecting a briefing from the Pentagon, actually not from inside the Pentagon, but from Pentagon officials. In a matter of a couple of minutes, that will clarify exactly what they're doing. But now, in addition to the Pentagon being at ThreatCon Delta, we understand that Navy installations all up and down the East Coast have also been put on ThreatCon Delta. That is the highest level of alert for the U.S. military. With the aircraft carriers coming into New York to help with some of the hospital response, we take it now to correspondent Molly Falconer, who is at one of the hospitals in New York City that is completely overwhelmed. Molly?
It's a hospital in chaos. It's been ground zero for the injured here all morning. We've been watching stretchers going in and out of the hospital, some horrifying scenes. And right now we are seeing some of the emergency medical supplies. They're just overwhelmed here, so we've been seeing 18-wheeler trucks just being brought in down the streets of Manhattan. As you can see, they're parked over across the street from St. Vincent's Hospital. That's a medical center that's handling over 100 of the dead, injured, and very badly burned here today. Basically, they ran out of supplies. They ran out of blood. They ran out of something called Silvadene, which treats burns. They have been raiding local pharmacies for more of that. They didn't have enough, so apparently now they've had more medical supplies brought in. As you can see, the sirens are going up and down the street right here. They have closed off all of 7th Avenue. That's one of the main thoroughfares in Manhattan. It runs right by the hospital. It also runs all the way down to Wall Street. So they are using this as an emergency corridor to ferry up the wounded and other casualties of this horrifying attack. We've been seeing police officers coming up and down here. The mayor was speeding by here earlier today. Also, New York City yellow cabs have been commandeered to bring in doctors and nurses. We've been seeing them come up and down here, going both ways on the street all this morning. Also, New York City buses are bussing in loads of doctors and nurses. They are calling now, hospital personnel are calling for clothing, because so many of the victims have had their clothing blown off them that they need extra shirts, pants, shoes, anything you have. They're asking for it here at St. Vincent's. They're also asking for type O positive blood. You can see behind me also the crowds are just waiting here for words of their loved ones. There is a makeshift information booth. I don't know if you can see that sign. It's just hand lettered. Things are happening so fast down here that they're trying to get the information out as fast as they possibly can. They set up a makeshift, almost card table, and a yellow sign just stuck on the wall of the hospital to let people know where the dead and injured are today. We were supposed to have a briefing about this at about 3 o'clock. Apparently hospital staff are just so overwhelmed that they had to push that back until 4 o'clock, and we'll bring you the latest word from that as we know it. That briefing, again, has been pushed back until 4 o'clock. Hospital personnel just overwhelmed. They couldn't get it to us in time at 3 o'clock, but here's what we know. Over 100 injured, wounded, possibly dead are inside St. Vincent's. They have commandeered everything from hospital corridors to the hospital gym to serve as makeshift ERs. The entire trauma staff is on alert. They have a disaster.
We need world condemnation here. Certainly when we find out who did it, we need to retaliate, and we need to demand that the world stand solid with us in condemning any country that houses or supports terrorism.
All right, former United States Senator Sam Nunn, Democrat of Georgia, joining us on the telephone, longtime leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee and certainly a leader in U.S. military affairs. Speaking of military leaders, we have now joining us live from Little Rock, Arkansas, former NATO Commander General Wesley Clark. And General Clark, you and I talked a little bit earlier today about what's happened. I know you have sources. Have you learned any more about either, we've obviously been looking at pictures of the horrific evidence of what happened, but have you learned any more about suspicions, information, about what might have been behind this?
Well, actually, I know that there will be a great deal of effort underway to find out who could have contributed to this. And there are various groups who could have been part of it. These groups often change their names. They have interlocking memberships, and so it will take time to run this down. But I think it's clear now, with the hindsight of a few hours, that how well coordinated this attack was, that it was launched from multiple airports, that it picked aircraft that had the largest possible fuel loads to increase their explosive capacity, that the people who were involved knew how to take over aircraft and fly them into the targets. And clearly they had some idea of the symbols of American power that they wanted to strike. And so I think we've got to allow some time for our military to work through this. I am reassured in talking to people inside the Pentagon that the command and control system in there is totally intact. All of the men and women who were part of that command and control system are at their stations and have been throughout this, and so it's very smooth and very effective. I'm thinking about all those people who were in that part of the Pentagon that was struck by the aircraft. We know there are a number of men and women who served there who aren't accounted for, and presumably there are casualties and fatalities there, but the command and control functions are totally intact.
But General Clark, what do you say to Americans, and this is the same version of the question I just put to Senator Nunn, who would say, we thought we lived in the safest country on earth, and now we find out that places that we thought were invulnerable, the Pentagon of all places, one of the most secure locations in Washington, much less in the country, the Twin Towers of the Trade Center, a building that had already come under terrorist attack and had been under increased security, to know that these kinds of places, and we've been told, at least I'm informed that Senator Orrin Hatch has said to some of my colleagues at CNN there was an indication that Camp David may have been a target of the jetliner that crashed in Pennsylvania. This is the sort of thing that makes people want to reevaluate everything.
Well, I've heard the same rumor about Camp David, but we know that for all...
Now, first reports had at least 600 people undergoing treatment at hospitals. Early reports said 150 of those were in critical condition. At least another 1,500 so-called walking wounded were taken to Liberty State Park in New Jersey for treatment. The mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, says it may take 2 days before a final figure of the dead and injured becomes known. No one would be surprised if it didn't take longer than 2 days. Yes, there was a New York mayoral primary vote scheduled today in New York. That was canceled. You don't have to repeat, but will, that the financial markets closed immediately. They'll have a conference call tonight to determine whether the financial markets will open tomorrow. Hospital officials have been preparing for the worst all day, and they've gotten the worst. The Bellevue Hospital medical director, Eric Mannheimer, called this, and I quote him, a catastrophe of unparalleled proportions. Now, speculation, and please mark the word, italicize the word speculation about the attack, rather quickly focused on terrorist fugitive Osama bin Laden, who was last reported in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's Taliban government, the radical fundamentalist Islamic government of Afghanistan, moved quickly in a public relations effort, understandable from their point of view, to say two things. One, that they deplored this. Two, that they had nothing to do with it. And three, this would surprise some people, the Taliban spokesman saying that Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with this. Exclamation point, pause. That's what they said. And again, we want to come back to nothing but speculation so far. And we pointed out before, and we will point out again, that there are high-level intelligence people in this country and around the world who believe the United States have made a mistake by always attributing almost every terrorist act to Osama bin Laden. There's a school of thought that says we've built him up much larger than he is. I'm not subscribing or not subscribing to that point of view, simply pointing out that there is a point of view, a belief that among some, that we've made too much of Osama bin Laden. But it's way too early to make any conclusions about that. It's just simply to note that speculation centers around Osama bin Laden, as it has in almost every other case of terrorism over the last 6 to 8 years. Although it's true that a lot of people in the
president can see him, they can see Secretary Rumsfeld, Secretary
Denny Kelly, thank
the Capitol.
Check in with you. I hear sirens virtually right underneath you. What's going on right underneath you?
Well, right underneath, I'm at Canal Street and the Avenue of Americas, which is about 20 blocks away from the World Trade Center there. Every once in a while, right outside my window right now, there are about 4 police vans and a police car. But the police seem to just be stationing there, almost resting right now. The area right around us is quite quiet. About an hour ago, 2 hours ago, there were hordes of people walking uptown. That's pretty much stopped. Now, Peter, I got to tell you, it's very strange. You look down on the sidewalk, and you just have people strolling in their summer clothes up in this neighborhood right here. But again, from what we've heard of that situation down by the World Trade Center, it's horrific. It's kind of eerily silent. The firemen are relieving each other every 15 minutes or so. They come out, they get showered down with fire hoses to get all the soot off, and then they go right back in and get to work.
And just remind me one more time, George, the layman's notion of a bunker is one thing out in Nebraska, and I assume the White House has another notion of bunker. What does it mean down the rabbit hole into the bunker?
Well, in the bunker would just be certainly underground, a secure situation room, but the important point, Peter, is that wherever that bunker is, and it's reinforced by guards and concrete and all that, the president is in full communication with his entire national security team, and he can direct them at a moment's notice. And I think the big question that they're going to have to address now as they gather the facts, as they try and figure out who's responsible for this, even though they want to get the president back to Washington as soon as possible, and I'm sure they'll do that, they won't want him to go before the country again until he has more to say, and probably until he can say what actions he's going to take in response to this.
Okay, thanks. George Stephanopoulos, who, as he pointed out, was somewhat isolated from the violence there, because as close as they'll let you broadcast at this point, but you can still see the smoke coming up. It's felt all over the country. A number of newspapers around the country are now putting out special editions of the day. I remember when the Challenger exploded, we were on television for many, many, many hours, and which does, to some extent, isolate you from what is happening. You become a conveyor belt for information. Going back to the hotel and realizing that the New York Times and the Washington Post had then put out 30-some-odd page editions in terms of the Challenger disaster, John, and it just reminds you that you can be isolated from something that is so overwhelming. And George Stephanopoulos acknowledges he is not as close to the violence and tragedy like ABC's Bill Blakemore is somewhat closer. Bill, can you hear me? Bill Blakemore? Okay, we'll come back to Bill Blakemore, but Bill Blakemore has, you know, we want to be as close as we can and not get in anybody's way, and I was pointing out that newspapers across the country publishing these special editions. There's not been a special edition of this magnitude probably since the Challenger disaster. Before that, Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, or in some cases, newspapers are putting out the first major special edition they've done since John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Many of the papers will clearly use terror in their banner headlines. Certainly the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel was one that did that with a subheading saying, "Attacks Rip Trade Center, Pentagon, America's Soul." And I think a great many people in the country feel that is precisely what has happened today, that the trade towers, as we've said many times, these absolute symbols of the United States in so many ways, right there on the edge of Manhattan, first city in the New World, the great advertisement to the rest of the world of commerce and success and upward mobility and all that stuff, and those two trade towers are simply no longer there. And then the attack on the Pentagon at the very heart of the establishment, the military government establishment today, and the deep psychological damage this, or wound, if not long-term damage, this is going to do to the country. And then we learned just a short while ago that United Airlines jet that was carrying 45 people, which crashed near Johnstown in Pennsylvania today, was, at least according to one congressman, James Moran, Democrat from Virginia, who had a Marine Corps briefing in Washington. He believes that that aircraft was originally intending by its hijackers to go to Camp David, the presidential retreat in the mountains of Maryland, and the crash site actually turns out to be about 85 miles northwest of Camp David. So no one should be surprised, perhaps no one is, at the ripple effect at every level of government, not to mention in everybody's soul today, from this initial attack on the trade towers. One of